Today's daf, we're going to be learning Shevuot daf Mem Hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Deborah Asham Weiss on the occasion of the bat mitzvah for granddaughter Tamar Chava Bamzer. She demonstrates that there are no boundaries to acts of Gemilut Chasadim. Today's daf is dedicated by the Hadran family in honor of Chani Farber and Sarah Chen on the occasion of their wedding. We wish you a new home that will be grounded in the happiness that is promised to one who brings their learning always, as we learned with Chani's mother, Rabbanit Michelle, Ashrei Shabalakam v'Talmudo biyado. On that note, we are Bezrat Hashem going to have a wedding. Not sure if it will be tomorrow as planned. We will have to see how things go. But being that I was planning to have the wedding on Monday, I recorded Mondays and Tuesdays dapim. So there will be no Zoom for the next 2 days. The Shiurim will go up early, and when it wants to get a head start, it'll be up by 5 in the morning by Israel time. And we will meet back up again on Wednesday. And wishing all of you b'sorot tovot and calm and peace, and may it be quieter days, and may your wish of dedicating the daf in honor of Chani and Sarah's wedding come true, and b'ezrat Hashem they will get married b'karov. Okay, with all that intro, we're going to get started in one of those weekends. Okay, we started our Mishna, and I'll apologize if the shiur is not as organized as it should be, but we will try our best. So we started our Mishnah with all these cases. We started with this assumption that the general oath that is taken by Torah, and the first thing the Gemara is going to ask is, where do we get this from? Okay, but the assumption of the Mishnah before we get to the source right now, because the Mishnah doesn't often describe its sources, is that Shevuot, that generally is required by Torah law, like in a Avodah B'Miktzad and in Eid Echad, is the one who's going to exempt themselves from doing anything. Like you're supposed to pay, you just say, okay, I don't owe what you claim I owe you, and you're exempt. Okay, that's called nishba ve'ino mishalem. You swear, and you don't have to pay. However, there are unique circumstances, and we started going over, the Mishna already listed them all, but now we're going over, we're still in the middle of the list, trying to figure out what all these other cases are, where we flip the shvur. The rabbis decide, we're going to see it inside explicitly, the rabbi said, oh, you know what? We're going to switch it. Okay, even though the Torah said this is the way it should go. In unique circumstances, we're going to switch it for a particular reason, each one for its own reason. So we're up to shekenegdo chashad al shvua. Ketzad. So what's the case? If the other side is suspect that they're a liar, then instead of, right, you're the one who's supposed to take the oath, but you've lied in other cases, we're going to see what exactly this means, then I will take the oath in order to get paid, rather than you taking the oath to exempt yourself. So if you, for example, lied falsely, okay, under oath. So you took an oath that you don't know testimony for someone, and you lied in a different case, and it turns out you were a lie. You were liable for that because you lied. Or a pikadon, you claimed you didn't have someone's pikadon that they asked you to watch, and it was a lie. Or even, and why even? Even a shvuat shav, even if you took a shvuat shav, which we said was super, super serious. So why even? Well, even shvuat shav, because shvuat shav doesn't have any financial ramifications. You're not trying to get money out of someone. You're just lying falsely in God's name. So even that, you're considered a liar, and therefore you can't take an oath. We don't allow you to take an oath anymore. So therefore, we're going to switch it back to the other person. Another group of cases all relates to Sanhedrin. I'm not going to go through all the details of these cases because some of them were big machlokot, what exactly they are. But we're now going to all the list of rabbinic psulei edut, okay, where the rabbi said you can't testify because we don't trust you. If you're a gambler, if you loan on interest, if you're mafrichei yonim, so at least one of the interpretations are you do a lot of bird racing, okay, like horse racing, or perhaps it's a little something else, but we're not going to get into that. So those who, again, this was also different details of what this was, but people who sell produce in the Shemitah year, which you're not allowed to do. These are all people looking to get money, quick, easy way, or a forbidden way. So in these cases, if that's the person who's supposed to take the oath, we flip it on to the other person, right? Like we talked about mepach shvua, it's like that. What if both end up being people who are both liars? Then what do? The shvua goes back to its original place. This is very unclear what it means. We're going to have to understand when we get to the Gemara, not today. But Divrei Rabbi Yossi, that's how Rabbi Yossi explains it. Rabbi Meir says, look, if both of them, right, we have this disagreement between these two dishonest people, what do? We split it 50-50, like we've seen in Bava Metzia. Mamon b'tav safek, Sumchus says cholkim, right, that's his approach. Split it 50-50. Okay. right? Even though theoretically it should be Hamotzi Mechaver Alav Haraya. So anyway, we're going to go back to this, what this machloket is about and what their different opinions are when we get to the Gemara. Chemvaniel Pinkaso. Now I'm going to mention, okay, this, for example, another sugyot. We've actually seen some of these sugyot already before, and mainly in Bava Metzia sugyot. But so some of this might be a little review. And we're actually dealing with like a bunch of really basic sugyot and famous, well-known sugyot. HaChemvaniel Pinkaso Ketzad. So what's the case of Chemvaniel Pinkaso? Now, this sounds like you go to a store and the storekeeper writes down you owe them money. Okay, and then we have a debate, did you pay the money or not? So right away they tell you, no, that's not what we're talking about. It's kind of funny. The Mishna's first, the Mishna's telling you, not this case, but that case. Okay, not like the person says, look, it says in my book, you owe me 200 zuz. And then again, right, he would have to, according to that, he would have to take the oath to get you to pay, right? So that's not the case. Ella omerlo ten lebeni satayim chitim or ten lepoali selamaot. If I went into a store, now the assumption is someone who has a store probably has a little more cash on hand. Okay, not always, but and we're going to have a whole debate here about who's who's the stronger person, the buyer or the seller, and we're going to talk about this in a little while. But basically, we have a guy who has a store, and he's got more cash on hand. So I ask him, can you give my son? Okay, either can you give my son wheat in advance and I'll pay you later. Or, and this is the story, the one we're going to talk about more, it's an easier case to describe because the son and the father are sort of connected. But anyway, it's going to be a little easier to describe this case with workers. I said, listen, I don't have money to pay my workers. Can you pay them up front for me? And I'll pay you later. Okay. Now, time goes on and the workers come to me and they say, hey, we never got paid. And I say, what do you mean? You go to the storekeeper. I say, hey, they never got paid. And the storekeeper says, what do you mean? I paid them and pay up. So now I have workers coming to me saying, you didn't pay me. And I have the storekeeper who says, I did pay them and you have to pay me money. And two people are claiming I have to pay them the same amount of money that I clearly don't owe both of them. So what? So who omer natati? He says, I gave them the money. Behem omrim lo natalnu. They said, we didn't get anything. Hu nishba v'notel behem nishba'im v'notlim. Okay? He takes an oath, meaning the storekeeper says, I'm taking an oath that I swear I never gave these people anything and pay me. And they take an oath that they never got paid and you have to pay me. So this person now, okay, it's a crazy case because this person has to pay double. Okay, now why is it? So first of all, let's just read one more line. Amar ben Nanas, and this we learned from the first half of Bava Metzia, this ben Nanas quote, Ketzad elu ve'elu ba'in lidei shvuat shav. What are you talking about? How could the rabbis have created a circumstance? Obviously, one of them is lying. Now, each of them can take the oath to get their money back. But how can we create a scenario where we're obligating people to take oaths where in the end, we're going to end up with both of them? One of them is definitely lying because either they were paid or they weren't paid. Someone's lying. Ella hu notel shelo b'shvua v'hem no'lim shelo b'shvua. Now, he agrees with the basic halacha that the balabayit, the person who asked the storekeeper to do this, has to pay both of them. They have no choice. But we're not doing any oaths because the oaths are going to we're going to create a scenario where we know there's a shvuat sheker. Okay, so what's the situation here? The problem is, theoretically, let's say I was the person who asked the storekeeper to do this. Theoretically, I should take the oath in order to be exempt from payment. But what kind of oath can I take? I don't know if the storekeeper gave the money. I don't know if the workers got the money. I can't say. I wasn't there. It all had to do with third party. And that's why even if it's my son, I don't know if my son's telling me the truth that he got them or didn't get them. I don't know if right. So because of that, I can't take the oath. And that's why we have no choice but to put the oath on the other side. That's what Tanakama says. Ben Nana says, no, we're going to make me pay. Now, you can see why Ben Nana is difficult because I'm going to have to pay. Clearly, what's the point of making the oath? Hopefully, the liar won't take a false oath, but there's a chance they will, and that's the problem, and that's what Ben Nanas wants to avoid. So it's a crazy case. Anyway, we're going to get back to it. Amar lechem bani, because we're in the Mishna only. Amar lechem bani, tein lebedin our payroll benatan. So now, since we're talking about a chembani, now we're off of nishba ve'notel, okay, these unique circumstances where we flip the oath. Now we're just talking about cases where there's a storekeeper and there's a buyer and there's a disagreement about them. So between them. Amar lechem bani, tein lebedin our payroll. I go into your store, I say, give me a dinar's worth of produce. V'natanlo, and you gave me the produce. Then you say, Amarlo, okay, a few minutes later, I don't know when, but at some point you say, Ten lioto dinar. You asked for a dinar's worth of payroll, but you didn't pay me yet. Give me the money. Amarlo, nitativ lecha, unitatoba umpali. I gave it to you, and not only did I give it to you, I gave it to you in this satchel or whatever, some sort of money bag. Yishava, or maybe I put it in your wallet. Okay, I put the money in your wallet. I remember. Yishava balabayit. Okay, so the balabayit has to take the oath that they didn't get paid in order to make in order to get the person to pay them the money. Okay, Shava balabayit, that he never got his dinar. Now we'll see a disagreement about this in a minute. Natan lo et hadina. If the person paid the money and then said, "Oh, thank you for correcting me. It's nitatoba umpali. You put it in your wallet. Thank you for correcting me, Ruth." Right? The case is, I said I gave you the money and I saw you put it in your wallet. Okay, so if the balabai, sorry, so and then I just said this wrong. This happens with not enough sleep. Yishava balabayit, the person who went into the store. I knew this was wrong because it's not a nishba v'notel. It's nishba ve'eno mashalem. The balabayit takes the oath that I definitely gave you the money. And if the balabayit takes the oath, the balabayit doesn't have to pay the money. We assume the balabayit is telling the truth. Okay, again, this is a classic nishba ve'eno mashalem, the regular type of oath. Natan lo et hadina. But second case, okay, and on this first case, we're going to have a debate in a minute, okay, but right now we think the case is, okay, the halacha is that the person who went into the store gets to take the oath that I already paid, and I don't have to pay you anything to exempt. That's a classic type of shvuah. Now, this, by the way, is a shvuah de Rabbanit, shvuah hesed. Okay, it's not a shvuah do, right? So there's no moda b'miksad or anything like that. There's no eid echad. It's just there's a disagreement, and in some cases, the rabbi said you have to take an oath, so to appease the other side, because the other side really believes they didn't get paid. Natan lo et hadina. What if it's the reverse? Okay, meaning the money was given already, and then okay, so I paid money for my produce. Amar lo tein li et hapirot, and then I said, okay, now give me my produce. Amar lo nitatim lecha v'olachtam letoch beitcha. I gave it to you, and I saw you bring it into your house. Yishava chemvani. So in this case, the chemvani does again a shvuat hesed and says, I definitely gave it to you, and doesn't have to pay. It doesn't have to give more produce. But Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol shaperot biyado yado ala elyona. Now, according to Rashi, and it seems the way to understand Rabbi Yehuda, he's referring to the first case, and we're saying whoever has the produce in his hands, yado ala elyona. What does this mean? So Rashi explains. Let's just read it inside. Aresha Pali. He's disagreeing with the first case that says I get to take the oath and I don't have to do anything. I take the oath that I definitely gave you the money. I don't even need to take an oath. Why not? If I have the produce in my hands, the proof is in the pudding. Why? Unless you're a person who takes on credit, but we're assuming you're not. Okay, that's a whole thing we have to kind of add to this story. But since you're not a person who's taking back kafa, where you're saying, I'm going to write down what you owe me and all that, which is like the chemani al picasso. But it wasn't really, but it was the case we said, oh, not right, don't think this. But generally, a storekeeper doesn't give out the produce unless the storekeeper gets paid. And therefore, if the storekeeper claims after I got the produce that I say I didn't get the money, the storekeeper claims the storekeeper didn't get the money, chances are the storekeeper's lying because no storekeeper gives out produce without getting the money first. That's a bad business practice, right? People are going to take advantage of you. So therefore, we can assume that the standard was done, which is the money was paid, and therefore the storekeeper can't get the money. Okay? And therefore, again, Tanakama said, I have to take the oath in order to be exempt from paying. Now we're going to say, I don't even need to take an oath. I'm just exempt. I walk out. Okay? No oath needed. Same exact case now. Why they say both cases is a good question with a money changer. Okay? A shulchani. Amar al shulchani, tainli di b'dinar ma'ot. I'm going to give you a dinar. You give me other money, right? Like coins. I want to change my money. Instead of a dinar, I want to get all the smaller coins. Vinatan, though, and you gave me all the coins, but I didn't. Maybe I gave you the dinar, maybe I didn't. We don't know. But Amarlo, tenli et dinar. The storekeeper says, "Give me the dinar now." Amarlo nitativ l'cha nitato umpali. I gave it to you, and you put it in your wallet. Yishabab alabayit. I have to take the oath that I did it, but I get to be right. I don't have to pay the money as long as I take the oath. Natan lo et dinar, but if I already gave you the dinar and then I say tain lo et tamaot, tain li et tamaot, and then I say, okay, give me my coins now. Amar lo nitativ lecha lishlachtam letoch kischa. I gave it to you and you just put it in your wallet. Yishava shulchani. Okay, in this case, the shulchani takes the oath. Because again, right, the assumption is, right, I said, give them a oath, and you said, I already gave you. And because you said I already gave you, you get to take the oath. And again, why are you taking the oath? Because the whole thing is to exempt from payment. That's the classic oath. Nishba ve'ino mashalim. You take the oath to not pay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein derech shulchani liteni sar ad she told dinar. And exactly as the previous case, in case number one, here in the shulchani case, the shulchani doesn't generally give out the money unless they get their dinar. So if I claimed I already paid you, I'm actually believed because it goes with, this is all chazak. Okay, this is why these sugyot are so basic, because we assume things based on, right, we make assumptions based on the way we know people interact in general. And we can make all sorts of assumptions and then act upon those assumptions halachically and say that determines our ruling. There's no need for an oath in that case. So there's a debate about between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda here, whether, again, remember, what we're talking about here in this kind of oath is a Shevuot Hesed, a rabbinic oath. This isn't the Doraita oaths. This is just saying, did the rabbis institute an oath in this case or did they not? Was there a need? Was there not a need? Now we're going to talk about some other cases where the rabbis instituted oaths. And these are strange cases because generally we say if somebody has a deed in their hand, okay, whether it's an IOU, right, some sort of IOU deed, okay, like either it's a person who took out a loan and, right, the creditor has the document in their hand, we assume it wasn't paid yet. Or a woman has a ketubah, okay, apropos discussion of weddings in the beginning. So the bride, right, gets a ketubah. It's a promise that if the husband, in the event of death or divorce, will pay her a certain amount of money. So if she has that ketubah, we assume it wasn't paid yet, right? Assuming, let's say, there's a divorce or there's a death of the husband, she can. That's an IOU document. The family owes her the money, or the husband if he's still alive. So now we're going to see cases, though, where even though you have a document, all sorts of exceptions to the rule, you're going to have to take an oath to get your money. So the first is the ketubah. Kashem she'amru, hapogem ketubata lo tipara ela b'shvuah. Okay, so a woman, what's a pogemic ketubata? Now, the husband, we learned this in ketubot and gitin, we talked about a lot. Often the husband would give the wife some of the ketubah money in her lifetime. If she ever needed some money for something personal, let's say she had a child from a different marriage and she wanted some money to pay for something, so then she would take it out of her ketubah money. Now, if she got some of her money already, or it could be, by the way, he's already divorced her and she took some of the money, okay? It could be after the marriage was over. Lo tipara ela b'shvuah. If already the document is now livgom is like damaged somewhat, right? Why is it damaged? Well, some of it was paid back. So since we already know that it's not as strong as it was before because some of it was paid back, therefore she can only demand whatever ketubah money she demands with an oath because we don't know exactly how much was paid back. What if one witness comes and says the woman got paid back all her ketubah money, but we don't have two witnesses? So in that case, again, since there's a bit of a doubt about whether she got it or not, lo tipa ela b'shvuah. To get her money, she has to take an oath. This, right? So this is, by the way, nishba v'notel, if you notice. These are also cases where you're going to take an oath to get your money, as opposed to normal oaths, which are just to exempt yourself from money. If she's getting her money, or this is really anybody getting money from liened property, okay? Because what happens? The husband, let's say, take the ketubah case. So the husband had money that was liened to her ketubah. He sold it to somebody else. She now goes and says, my husband didn't give me back my ketubah money. Pay me, right? I can seize the property. It was lien property. Now, what's the problem? Kind of like the chavani al pinkaso. This person has no idea if really the loan was paid back or not. And we talked about there could be a knunya, what we talk about, a conspiracy. Could be the woman and her husband made a knunya and said, even though maybe they're not even married now anymore, but, let's just say that I never got my ketubah money and then we'll get the lamb from the guy you sold the property to and we'll split a 50-50. So she has to take an oath because that person has no idea whether it was given back or not. Or same thing with orphans. Orphans have no idea. Let's say the husband died and now they owe the ketubah money. They don't know, or let's say the husband divorced and then died. And the orphans have no idea was the ketubah money paid back or not. They don't know. The father never told them. So or if during the lifetime, sometimes the husband gave the wife some of the ketubah money. The kids would have no way of knowing. So in order to get from orphans, you have to take the oath. And anyone who takes from orphans, remember, because maybe the father gave back the loan already, whatever it might be. There's always a concern of taking advantage. Hanifrat shelo b'fanav. Let's say Rashi says he gave her a get, he sent it from abroad, and he's not there, and she goes to his property to get the ketubah money. So again, she can go to the court and say, I need the ketubah money, but they're not going to let her take it unless she takes an oath. Lo tipar b'shvuah, because the husband's not there to say, hey, listen, I already gave her back some of the money. Some of the ketubah money. Orphans who want to get money that their father was owed have to take an oath. What's the oath they take? They don't know for anything for sure, but what did they say? Right? We swear our father didn't command us upon his death that this loan was paid back already, or he didn't tell us anything about it, or we didn't see any documentation, like a receipt, that this document was paid back. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch Omer, afilu nolad, he disagrees a little bit with this because according to this, you have to say all those things. Our father didn't tell us anything upon his death, and we didn't find anything in his documents. But what if you have a child who was born after the father was dead already? Okay, afilu nolad ben la'achar mitata av. Now, according to Tanakami, you can't take the oath because you have to take an oath that my father didn't say anything on his deathbed. Now, the kid wasn't alive on the deathbed, so he can't take that oath. But comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch and he says, Harez and Nishba v'notel. He does take an oath. What is take an oath? He says, well, I swear I didn't. Obviously, this is going to be years later when he's old enough. He says, I swear I didn't find any documentation in my father's stuff that would indicate that this document was paid back. So if he has a shtar in IOU, he can collect it as long as he's willing to take this oath. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Im yesh edim shamar ha'ab shamitato shtar zeino parah hu notel shelo b'shvuah. If there's edim who say, we saw your father say at the time of death that this document, I have these documents and they weren't paid back yet, then you don't need the child to take the oath at all. So the orphans need to take oath, but not in this case, according to Rashbam. Ve'elu nishba'in shelo b'tana, last part of our Mishnah. These people, okay, until now, we've all been talking about a case where somebody comes and says, you owe me money, and the other one says, no, I don't. Okay, and the first one comes with a claim, a definitive claim, you owe me money. Now we're going to talk about cases where even without a tana, without a legitimate claim, now obviously there has to be some claim, otherwise there wouldn't be any argument here. But without a definitive claim, there's certain people who can demand an oath from the other side. So for example, shutafin, partners. This is classic. We have partners and one is the finance person and one is not. Okay, so one is dealing with all the finances. So from time to time, the other partner can say, listen, you got to swear to me, take an oath that there was no foul play here. You didn't take money for yourself. So because, there's on the one hand, there's this trusting relationship, but the other hand, you never really know what the other person's doing. So you can do it. And likewise in Arisim, same thing with the sharecropper. The sharecropper takes a percentage for themselves and then gives the rest to the owner. But who knows how much they took? And right, there's a concern for dishonesty. So the owner of the land can make the sharecropper take an oath. Apitropin, okay, an apitropos who works, right, who basically manages the property of orphans, for example, usually it is. So again, the orphans could say, take an oath that you've been dealing with our money properly and handling our stuff well. And you didn't take anything for yourself. Sometimes the husband would die and leave the wife in charge of all the property, which was really the orphan's property. So they can make her take the oath, or ben abayit, or if it's one of the brothers who was in charge for the other brothers of managing the funds of the estate after the father dies. So again, this is a classic case where one person is completely in charge of the money and there's a concern that maybe they're doing something wrong. So, or taking money for themselves. Unfortunately, we know too much of circumstances like this. So here's the situation. So the guy says, what are you claiming against me? So he says, I just want you to take an oath that you're being honest. Chayav. So the person has to take the oath. However, but if they already distributed the property, okay, and like the Aris already gave the portion to the Balabayit, and the brothers already split the property, it's not like one is handling the estate for all the others, but they already divided it, then then at that point it's too late to demand any oath. It's only while they're handling the other property, but if it's about the division or something, and the division's already done, then no. Okay. However, there is an exception to the rule. If after the money was divided, then you want to make the other brother, let's say, take an oath about the mishandling of funds, possibly from before or whatever it might be. If you had some other thing between the two of you and they were obligated an oath for something else, then you can do Gilgul Shvuah and make them take an oath also about that. Okay, and that we learned about Gilgul Shvuah already. Magalgalim alav takol, you can make them take an oath on all sorts of other things. Then that is allowed. And the last line of the Mishnah, Ashvi'it mishametet et hashvuah. If you have an obligation to take an oath, let's say you were moja b'miktzad on some sort of obligation, and then the Shemitah year came. When the Shemitah year, at the end of the Shemitah year, the chovot are canceled, right? The monetary obligations are canceled. Also, the oath is canceled. Okay, so just like it cancels the obligation, it also cancels the obligation for the oath to be taken. Okay, now we get back to this basic law of nishba ve'eno mishalem. Where do we get this from? That's the basic Torah oath. Where do we get it from? To Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'lakach ba'ala v'lo yishalem." This is in the Shevuot HaShomrim. Okay, we're going to talk later again about Shevuot HaShomrim. These are where the Torah says you have to take an oath, right? It says, you gave me my property to watch, and let's say your property to watch, and I was watching it, and then let's say I was a Shomer Chinam, and I wasn't making any money, and then it was stolen. So I have to take an oath that it was stolen, and then I don't have to give you back the object, because we're just worried that maybe I'm stealing it for myself, right? Because it's already in my possession, your item, so we have to take an oath. I have to take an oath that I didn't steal it, and then I'm exempt, because a Shomer Chinam is exempt from theft, like a shomer sachar is exempt from onus. Okay, a shomer sachar, if I get paid, then I actually have to pay you if it was stolen, because that's what I'm getting paid to make sure it doesn't get stolen or lost. But if some unexpected damage happens, then I can take an oath about that. So anyway, it says there, I don't remember exactly which section this was in, but in one of the sections it says, "V'lakach ba'ala v'lo yishalem." The owner takes it. Okay, now what's takes it? Takes the oath. Okay, v'lo yishalem, and won't pay. Nisha alav l'shalem lo shvuah. Okay, the one who's supposed to pay, that's the one who has to take the oath. That's what it says. Okay, so there you see, nishba ve'eno mishalem. Okay, that's the basic halacha. Okay, so now the question is, like just so you understand, lakach ba'alav means the person watching the item takes an oath. That's the literal translation of the word of the sentence. So from there, it's clear. So that builds the paradigm for all oaths. Okay, the Shevuot HaShomrim is our paradigm. That's the classic oath. Pay in order to exempt yourself. You take an oath in order to exempt yourself from payment. Now we get into an interesting sugya, and as I said before, it's kind of like who's the weaker, who's the stronger, who needs who more. The buyer needs the seller, does the seller need the buyer, or in this case, employer needs the employees, or do the employees need the employer? Okay, who's more desperate, so to speak? So elu nishba'im v'notlim. So now the Gemara asks, Mishna sachir d'tkinu leRabbanan demishba b'shachkim. Why in the first case in the Mishnah the sachir, the person who works? Okay, so you hire workers, and then the workers claim. Okay, one of the workers says you never paid me. So instead of normally you would be the one to say, I swear I paid you and be exempt. No, in this case, the worker gets to say, you didn't pay me. I'm taking an oath. You have to pay me now. So why is this different? Why did the rabbis do this takana and say that I could get, let's say you hired me to work for you. I can take an oath to get paid. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So before we get to an answer, we get a statement which we're going to have to reinterpret a few times. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name Shmuel, halachot gedolot shanukam. These are big halachot. Now halachot really means halacha l'mosh misinai. So the Gemara says, halachot, hani hilchat aninu. This is halacha l'mosh misinai. Who said this is halacha l'mosh misinai? It's not. Ela'ema, right? It was like a rabbinic or thing that came later. Ela'ema takanot gedolot shanukan. Oh no, what we mean is this was a big takana the rabbis instituted. Okay. Gedolot michal dikak tanot. What? There's big takanot the rabbis institute, and there's small ones. I don't know why that bothers them so much, but like, why would you say that? Takanot kfuot shanukan. Okay, they said these are what's the word? They're set. Okay, this is a takana, an institution that was set and permanent. Okay, thank you for the help. Permanent takana. Okay, that was just a semantics. Akura Rabbanan l'shvuah balabayit v'shadua sachir. So what was this takana kfu'ah, that this permanent takana, that they uprooted? In other words, that they really trying to say this is a big deal. They uprooted a shvuah from the Torah. Shvuah from the Torah is nishba ve'eno mishalem, and they switched it. And they did it, they put it on the other side. Why? Mishum k'dei chayav, for the survival of workers. Okay? This is like labor union, right? We have to protect workers. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. There's two sides, right? Like in labor unions, right? What about the employer? The employee, right? The employer needs protection also. So why are we basically going to penalize, right? If this worker, let's say me, I'm willing to swear falsely and say I never got paid and now I'm going to get double pay. That's unfair to you. So like there's two sides here. Why are you leaning toward the side of the worker? So they say, Balabai gufe nichale, the Mishna b'sachir v'shakil, ki echad yitarben le poalim. Well, this is the thing. If you're known as the person who hires workers, and then, like, let's say I heard that you took an oath recently to say, right, the worker said we never got paid, and you said, I swear I paid you and you were exempt from payment. I wouldn't want to work for you if I heard that. No, I don't know if you're telling the truth or not, but I won't want to work for you. And then you'll end up with no workers. Like, again, who's more desperate? You're desperate for workers. You can't deal with your field by yourself. You're reliant on workers. And if you take the oath and get exempt from paying workers, no one's going to want to work for you. To which they say, Adrabah, what do you mean? You could say the same thing in the flip. As a worker, I'd rather actually let you do that. Why? Because for the same reason. If I'm known as the person who takes oaths and says, you didn't pay me, and you might, and who knows, maybe you double paid me, you're going to say, I'm not hiring that worker. And then I will be out of a job and I'll have no money. So again, who's more desperate? You could say it either way. So they say, Balabayit al korche agar. Balabayit anyway will hire people because the Balabayit is desperate for workers. And they say, what do you mean? Sachir nami al korche mitgar, right? The Sachir also will work even though, right, the Sachir will be willing to work anyway, even though the Balabayit is maybe taking advantage because the Sachir is desperate for work. In other words, again, it's all the same. Ella, now we finally get to the difference. Balabayit taru b'po'alav. What's the issue here? The issue is that when we have this argument, and I say I never got paid, and you say I paid you, we're assuming that you probably got confused because you have a lot of workers and you don't remember who you paid, who you didn't pay, you might not remember. And therefore, I'm more believed, and therefore we allow me to take the oath. So then they say, well, if we believe me, then why do I even need to take an oath? If we assume you forgot and you don't remember, and you're just saying you pay me because you think you pay me, but you confuse me with the other worker, then, right, or you just don't remember. So we should allow me to get it without even taking an oath. Look, you really believe that you paid me. So in order to appease you, we make me take the oath, and then you can at least go home saying, well, probably she wasn't lying because why would she take an oath to say she never got paid? And that will just calm you, appease you. Okay, and now we have another question about this. We could avoid this whole situation if what? If we just said, pay your workers in front of witnesses, relate to labor aiding. Why don't we just say, pay your workers in front of witnesses, and then we won't get to this problem. Trichale Milta, they said that's a balagan. Every time you want to pay your workers, you're going to have to pay it. Now remember, they had to pay by the day. It wasn't like they paid even once a week or once a month. They pay by the day because of Baltalin. Remember, if you're a worker for the day, you have to get paid by the end of that next night, right? The night that comes right after that day, by the next morning, you have to be paid. So that would be a pain all the time to always bring aiding. But maybe you should pay up front before I do the work. Now, you're going to say that's not a good plan because maybe your worker will renege on you and you've already paid, right? Nobody likes to pay up front for that reason. It's the one thing you hold on your workers. So the Gemara says, actually, Shneim rotzim b'kafad. They both prefer to wait till the end of the day. Why? Okay, so this is interesting. Rashi doesn't say what I said about you don't want to pay up front because maybe the worker will renege. Rashi actually brings two different answers, for each side. Balabai pamim she'ein mitziyot lo ma'ot shachari. You actually don't want to pay up front because sometimes you don't have the money in the morning. You also work. You work during the day to make money to be able to pay your workers at the end of the day. And Poel, what about the worker? Why is it in the best interest? Wouldn't you think the worker want to get paid up front? There's a great one. We're worried that maybe you'll spend the money on, I don't know what, maybe you'll buy candy or something during the day and you'll come home, right? This is all the stories about the chassid or you'll give it away to a poor person, right? And then it comes home and then the wife is like, where's the money? We have no food to eat. So if you get at the end of the day, you'll probably go home and just, use it for your food. But so everybody has a better interest in that. And that's why we don't suggest pay up front. Okay, so we don't suggest pay by Adim. That's too much of a pain. We don't suggest pay by up front because no one really, it's not in anyone's best interest. Now we have a different question. If we're assuming there's this disagreement about us between was I paid, was I not? So I get to take the oath. Well, what do you think if there's a parallel case where there's a disagreement about how much we agreed that you should pay me? It would be the same. I would be believed based on our theory, but it's not true. Okay, so top of Amabed, even if it's a debate about how much money we decide, we agreed upon, you would think it would be the same. But Alama Tanya, why does it say in a Braita, Uman Omeo? Now, an Uman is kind of the same as a worker. An Uman is you hire a skilled worker to do a job for you. Like, let's say you've tended to the dry cleaners. Omer, Uman Omer, Shtayim Katzatz Tali. And then you go to pick up your clothes, okay? And I say, you agreed you were going to pay me two. And you say, I only agreed to pay you one. And now we have a disagreement. Now, what will we assume? The Balabayit doesn't remember. It's the Uman who's going to remember. So the Uman should be able to take the oath to get paid the double, right? The two amount. But it doesn't say that. It says, if I'm going to get paid two, I have to bring proof. If I don't have proof, I can't get two. Now, they do add here, if you notice, this is a modeh b'miktzah, because you agreed to one, you just didn't agree to two. You actually have to take a modeh b'miktzah oath, okay? The person who hired me to do the job. But still, I don't take the oath in order to get paid. Motzim chaver olav is a little tricky here, because it doesn't really, it means if I want to get paid, I have proof. If I don't have proof, then you have to take an oath that you don't owe me the whole amount. If you're not willing to take the oath, you actually have to pay me double. But if you take the oath is on you. So they say, what do you mean? When you go into a store and you go to either a craftsman or a dry cleaner or whatever it might be, you for sure remember how much you were planning to pay. That's something you remember. Whether or not a person pays their workers is a different story. That people might get confused. They have a lot of workers. They might get confused. But when you go to get something done, you go to the tailor, you go to whatever, you know what you're going to pay. Okay, back to, now we're not talking about katzatz anymore. We're going back to the original case. Now, according to what we said, Balbai doesn't remember if they paid. So that should be across the board. But we're now going to learn that until now, this whole thing, they didn't say this, but it's been talking about that we have this disagreement. Let's say I was a day worker sometime throughout the night, okay, where the time for paying me hadn't yet arrived. And you say, I'm sure I paid you. I'm sure I paid you. But if our disagreement is already the next day, where it's past the time you were supposed to pay me, which was by the very end of the night, then avar's mano. Now, you would assume if we think that you got confused and you don't remember who you paid, who you didn't, it should be the same halacha. I should be able to take the oath to get my payment. But right, so if the time passed for when you're supposed to get paid, when I was supposed to get paid, it should be the same halacha. But alama tanya, why does it say in a braita avar's mano v'lo natan? If the time passed and I didn't give it to you, right, and I claim you didn't give it to me, hareze eino nishba v'notel, then it's too late. I can't take the oath. You take an oath, not me. And you say, I already paid you. So why is that any different? So now we say, because again, we go to chazaka. What are assumptions we make about human behavior? Chazaka ain't balabayit over here, but bal talin. In other words, we assume until the time a bal talin arrives that you can't delay paying a worker, you might get confused about who you paid, who you didn't, because your mind is full of a lot of other things. But you have in your mind somewhere, like when it comes time to pay me, then you'll remember, and you'll remember exactly who you paid, and then you'll pay me. So if it's beyond the time we assume you took care of your what you were supposed to do, it's only before when it's that in between time where you're supposed to pay, but it's not yet bal talin, that's when we think you're going to get confused. That already becomes a little tricky because hard to understand this exactly. Now they say, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. Didn't we say you get confused? You have so many workers and you might get confused and think you paid me? So they say, again, this doesn't really answer it, but but that is all before the time to the obligation arrives. Say once the time comes, that's when you really sit down and think about who do you owe, who do you not owe, and then like you don't make mistakes at that point. So then they say, wait a minute. So we're making assumptions about human behavior. Assumption about human behavior is now, what's the issue? We have two people here. One is lying, one is not. So the assumption is you must pay your workers on time. Everybody pays workers on time unless we know otherwise. Well, wait a minute. What? Me? Wait, don't we assume most people don't lie? If we assume most people pay their workers on time, then we assume most people don't lie and try to steal money and try to claim someone owes them money when they don't. So why don't we say I'm believed? Because why would I claim you owe me money if you didn't owe me money? What I'm trying to steal from you, most people don't steal. If we're going by assumptions, let's go by that assumption. So they say, now we're going to say there's two chazakot for the balabait and only one for me, and that's why the balabaits believe. What are the two? It's interesting because one relates to the case, but not exactly a chazaka about the balabait. Chada, one is the one we discussed, she'en balabait over b'bal talin, that most people pay their workers on time. V'chada de'ein sachir mashes charov. The other is, I generally would make sure if I'm owed money, I'm going to go to you and make sure I get paid my money on time. So if it's past the time and I only bother you after the time, chances are I got paid on time because chances are I bothered you on time to get my money, and that this would have all been resolved earlier. So therefore, if it's past the time, there's two chazakot going for the balabait, and I only have one, the chances are I'm not a liar, but that gets overridden by the two pushing the other way. Okay. Now we get to this halacha of Shmuel. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman's quoting Shmuel, which he often does. Rav Nachman, third generation Amora, quoting Shmuel, saying, "Lo shanu ela she." He's like second to third generation. "Lo shanu ela shescharo be'edim, aval scharo shelo be'edim mitoch sheyachol." Actually, he's probably second generation. I think he's really second. Okay. Anyway, Rav Nachman was a student of Shmuel, so that would put him in second generation. I was getting confused because Rabbi Yitzchak is going to respond. He's third generation. So comes Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, and he says, "Lo shanu ela shescharo be'edim." This whole thing about the worker that I can come and take an oath and get my money back is only if you hire me with witnesses. Okay, this is a big chidush, and we're going to talk about this. Aval scharo shelo be'edim, and now we're going to get to what we call migo. So this thing is very basic. It's all about believability. If you hire me and there were no witnesses, not that I was hired and that I did the work, okay? Mitoch sheyachol omar lo scharticha me'olam. Theoretically, you could have had a better lie. You could have just said, I never hired you. But what did you say? I hired you, but I paid you, right? So we always assume you're going to choose, if you're going to lie, you're going to choose the best, easiest lie. The best, easiest lie is, I don't know your money because I didn't hire you. And if there's no witnesses that you hire me, no witnesses that I worked for you. Basically, you can say that. So the fact that there were no witnesses and you said that I hired you, but I paid you, you're believed. And then I don't get to take the oath and get paid. So Shmuel basically limits the halacha in the Mishnah. And then comes Rabbi Yitzchak, just like we had a few dapim ago, Amar le Rabbi Yitzchak, Yaishir, which, by the way, Rabbi Yitzchak said the exact same thing to Rabbi Nachman about a different halacha of Shmuel, about the moda b'mikta, chitim and solim and all that. So I'm not going to get back into that right now, but v'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said, good that you said this, you're right. And Rabbi Yochanan said the same thing. So we have Rabbi Yitzchak in Babylonia, in Israel, hearing the Torah of Rabbi Nachman from Babylonia. I like that, what he says. And Rabbi Yochanan said the same thing. Now, again, like we had before, the Gemara, you'll probably remember this. The Gemara says, Michal Depliga le Rish Lakish, the fact that he says Rabbi Yochanan said, like you, what, Rish Lakish didn't? Okay, either Rish Lakish was drinking at the time, or he just hesitated for a minute, and then Rabbi Yitzchak in the meantime left the Beit Midrash, didn't hear what Rish Lakish said, but we assume Rish Lakish probably agreed. So we have Shmuel saying this, Rabbi Yochanan agreed with him, perhaps Rish Lakish, and now we're going to see that Rav agreed with him as well. It's very kind of radical halacha that we're limiting the Mishnah to a case where there were witnesses that saw that the person was hired. And because otherwise there'd be a migo. And that's what we're going to see now. Rav agrees. Itmar Nami was also said, Amar Rav Menashe Bar Zvid Amar Rav. Rav was quoted also by someone is saying, Lo shanu ela shescharo be'edim. Ascharo b'shelo be'edim, mitoch shechol omar lo scharticha me'olam, echol omar lo scharticha v'natati lecha scharcha. Exactly the same thing, word for word. Rav said the same thing, that this was only if it was done with witnesses. Without witnesses, you'd be believed by a migo. Comes Rami Bar Chama and says, Kama ma'alya hashmata, besides that we have Rav, Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish, the great of the first and second generation Amoraim in Israel, in Babylonia, saying this. Comes Rabbi Bar Chama also says this is great. Comes Rav, fourth generation. Amarle Rav. Rav says to Rami Bar Chama, okay, they're later. My Mal Yuta, why do you think this is so great? And comes Rava with this unbelievable thing. Okay, we learned, I'm just going to tell you, we learned about Shomrim, right? What happens in Shomrim? So I already said this today. Shomer Chinam watches your item for free, says, listen, it got stolen. Oh, they take an oath and they're free, right? They're exempt. And we've talked about this many times. We learned about it in Baba Mitzvah a lot. We never heard this line before. Comes Rav and he says, well, we didn't hear what really is going to be shocking is what Rami Bar Chama says, okay? But Rava's question makes a lot of sense. Rava says, why do you think this is such a great halacha? Let's apply this logic, okay? Make an analogy from here to Shomrim. How could you ever have a Shevuot of Shomrim? Why would the Shomer Chinam need to take an oath that it was stolen? Because right? Whoever said, right? When I got your item to watch, no one ever said it had to be with witnesses, right? We never talked about that in the Torah, right? You gave me something to watch. Who says we have to have witnesses? Now, in the lack of witnesses, I could be believed by amigo. Why would I have to take an oath? I would just, now the Torah says I have to take an oath that it was stolen from me. But why would I have to do that? I could just say, Lo ayu dvarim me'olam. Yachol amar lo ne'ensu. They're actually talking about a case of a shomer sachar. If I was hired to work for you, and then I said something happened to it, I shouldn't have to take an oath. I should be believed. We know there's a Shevuot HaShomer, midoraita. Nobody ever said it's only if you gave me the item with witnesses. So if we have a migo there, we would have a migo here as well. So comes Rami Bar Chama to answer Rebbe's question, and he says, Shevuot HaShomer, the Avkid Lebe Edim, is only if the person got the Pikadon with witnesses. We never heard this before. Okay, and all of Bava Metzia, this never came up, as far as I remember. So now he says, what, still that doesn't help. Even if there were witnesses that saw me get the item, you could still say, oh, I returned it already, and you'd be believed. So the fact that you're saying, oh, I have it, but it was stolen, also you should be believed by Amico, because if you really wanted to lie, you would have just said, I returned it to you already. So therefore, you could say, listen, it was, some onus happened to it, unexpected, thing. So if it wasn't extreme enough, Rami Bar Chama now answers to resolve Rabba's question, must be you gave it with a shtar. You gave it with a document. Without a document, there's no Shevuot HaShomrim. The person could just say, oh, it was stolen, or oh, unexpected mishap. Crazy. That's so radical. Now, the commentaries all jump on this and say, by the way, we don't posket like this, okay? It's not true. Anyway, Rabbi Chama was just trying to answer Rabba's question and came up with this, scenario. It's really interesting to think about the way Gemara works. Anyway, we don't have time, so we're going to go on. Now we're just pointing out something about Rabba and Rabbi Bar Chama. They actually both agree about this particular point. From here you see they distinguish between edim and shtar. Now, Rami Bar Chama and Rabba disagree about this whole thing, but they both agree that if you give it with a shtar, you'd have to return it with witnesses. If it was done with a shtar, you'd have to return it with witnesses. You wouldn't be believed otherwise. But if you returned it if you gave it with witnesses, you would be believed to say, I returned. Okay, you wouldn't need to return it with witnesses. Anyway, Kari Rami Bar Chama le Rav Sheshet. Now Rami Bar Chama says about Rav Sheshet, Vayasim David Hadran Elu Bilibos. Rami Bar Chama now says about Rav Sheshet. We don't know who Rav Sheshet, why he's coming in here. We'll see in a minute. That David really paid attention and went and checked into this, because Rav Sheshet went and checked into. He just quotes pasuk about David doing his homework. Rav Sheshet really thought about Rav and Shmuel and came up with a difficulty. Rav Shmuel, here's the scenario. Rav Sheshet goes to Rabba, the son of Shmuel, and says, Amalei, Tani Marmidi b'Sachir. Do you have anything to say about Sachir? Right, this is Rabba, the son of Shmuel. Amar le'in Tanina. Yeah, the Mishna says, Sachir b'zmano nishba v'notel, ketzab, b'zman shamar lo schartani v'lo natan l'schari, v'ala omer scharti, chav natan l'cha scharcha. This is our case, okay? Within the time they're supposed to be paid, right? Not beyond the time. The guy says, I paid you. He says, you didn't pay me, okay? Aval amarlo, okay, in that case, that's the case. Aval amarlo, shtayim katzatzli, v'ala lo katzatzli, el echat. But if it was a disagreement about how much mechaber alav haraya. Okay, what does that have to do with Rabbi Shmuel? Well, once Rabbi Shmuel said this, he said, hami desefa b'raya. Now, the latter part of this brayta that he quoted is with witnesses. You need witnesses. If you don't have witnesses, it doesn't work. Habi reisha below raya. The first case doesn't say anything about witnesses. It seems like you don't need witnesses. And what did Rabbi Shmuel say? The case is only if there were witnesses. If there weren't witnesses, you're believed by amigo. So I'm Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Here comes the answer. With this, we'll finish. Reisha b'sefer b'raya. No, you can't prove for that brayta. They're both talking about witnesses. But why did only the second one mention witnesses? Because there's two totally different kind of witnesses. You're mixing witnesses of apples and witnesses of oranges. Because raya de l'shalem katane, raya de shvua lo katane. One is a proof, did the person pay or not, right? The person has to bring proof about the price. But the raya de shvua lo katani, but the raya for the requirement of the shvua, of the raya that the whole thing had from the beginning, right? Were you paid or not? That, were you hired with witnesses? That those witnesses weren't the ones mentioned here. So you can't learn anything from this brayta, and therefore this is not a difficulty on Shmuel. Okay, so we brought Rabba's difficulty on Shmuel and on Rav and all that. And the second difficulty Rav Sheshet had, but neither of them really pans out to be a difficulty. And with that, we finish. So our main topic for today, besides that we saw all these different cases of the Mishna, some where the shua is flipped, some where there's a Shevuot Hesed the rabbis instituted for various reasons, like even if you have a shtar, you still have to take an oath. Then we really got into this, number one, source for how we know Nishba Bein Shalem in general, and then why we flipped it in the Safir case, which in the end, after a whole back and forth, really just came down to the Baal Bayit doesn't really remember. Then we have the limitation, only if it's within the time. Once it's beyond the time, then we assume actually they did pay, and you can't take the oath. And then we had, and also, by the way, it's only if you hire with witnesses, otherwise they believe by amigo, which we had two difficulties, which we kind of resolved. I would say kind of, because again, the resolution of the Shomrim one was to say something really chadshani about Shevuot HaShomrim, that it's only in a case where there was a shtar to begin with, that the item was given to the other person. But perhaps there's other ways to resolve this, and you can maybe explain that these are not exactly parallel cases. Anyway, I'll leave that with you to think about. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone B'sorot Tovot, and reminder that there won't be Zoom for the next 2 days, but the Shiurim will be up. And guess you'll hear about whether our wedding happens on Monday night or not.